completely through.
Based on their expert opinions, coupled with the testimony of Watkins, the woman had died within minutes of her body being found. Back in Berners
Maybe
Street,
Jack the Ripper was a
Frederick
bunch of
Blackwell
people.
and Dr.
I'm
Phillips
sure that's a
reached the same
theory.
conclusion. The woman in
Like it was a
Blackwell's
cult.
yard. About 1:45, Schwartz had been walking down Berners Street. As he came up on Dutwell's yard, he witnessed a man throwing a woman to the ground in front of the entrance. The woman had quote,
He didn't try and help?
3 times, but not very loudly.
Schwartz would later identify this woman as Elizabeth Stride. Schwartz did not try to intervene, but opted instead to simply cross the street. That's when he spied a second man on the opposite side who was lighting a pipe.
Alright, Israel.
Adeline therefore deduced that the man who shouted Lipsky was directing an insult at Schwartz, who was described as having a quote,
Strong Jewish appearance.
The man with the pipe, meanwhile, may have been an innocent passerby who became frightened along with Schwartz. Whether Adeline's interpretation is correct,
So,
it's
they didn't
doubtful.
try and help at all? This man
Nevertheless, Schwartz's account is compelling.
straight up throws the woman down, getting ready to murder her, and they just walk by?
Elizabeth Stride was attacked.
Fucking rough. Thanks for some worth our Swifty and Trust
A
Tez.
large crowd of spectators had assembled upon
They
the
could have at least started yelling, like,
scene,
ah.
driven by their morbid
Ooh,
curiosity
ah.
to get
Don't
evidence
kill
of the
her.
body. The woman in Mitre Square was identified as 56-year-old Catherine Eddowes. On the night of her death, Eddowes had been out drinking. She got so drunk that around 8:30, she was found lying on the sidewalk in Aldgate High Street, surrounded by a crowd.
Glad you liked it, Nash.
The commotion attracted a few officers who then escorted Eddowes to a nearby police station. What's so incredibly tragic about the Eddowes case is how narrow it is for justice. First of all, the only private residence on Mitre Square was occupied by a policeman and his family. They had slept right next to an upper floor window overlooking the motorcycle.
Jesus.
Second of all, a night watchman and retired policeman had been cleaning a warehouse within
Oh
earshot
my
of the
god.
motorcycle. He would routinely hear the footsteps of patrolling officers, yet heard nothing at the time of the murder. Finally, Constable James Harvey had glanced into Mitre Square at roughly 20 minutes to 2. That's right in between the sighting by Lavenda and the Bottom's gallery. Harvey should have had an unobstructed view of the motorcycle, yet he failed to notice anything suspicious.
Yeah, someone said that the theory is that he was a policeman. I would believe that.
3 o'clock.
But I do think it's multiple people.
Cloth was 3 days before the murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The Central News Agency of London received a letter in the post, the author of which claimed responsibility for the recent murders and to be planning for the court next John. On the off chance that the letters were genuine, the police decided to make them public. The hope was that someone would recognize the handwriting. Unfortunately,
That's such a weird idea.
instead, it merely
I would
served to
never
advertise
recognize
the name
handwriting.
with which the letters had been signed. The doctors who examined the kidney all agreed that it was human, but whether it was the same left kidney removed from the body of Eddowes could not be determined. It could, for instance, have been a lab coat or a medical student or someone with access to a human.
It's crazy. Trolls existed all the way back then.
It is pretty certain that the monster has become pregnant and has suspended its horrible work for the present.
That's, I don't know about that gloating. Man's calling GG.
Miller's court was in Crawley with police, but the door to room 13 was locked and had to be forced open with a pickaxe. What they found inside was food and the stuff of nightmares. Dr. George Phillips described the body as, quote,
Cut all to pieces,
Dr. Thomas Bond described the woman's face as, quote,
hacked beyond recognition,
the abdomen had been, quote,
emptied of its viscera,
while the throat had been, quote,
severed all round, down to the root.
the body had been monstrously disfigured, with loose organs dispersed all around. The room itself was sparsely furnished and offered little in the way of clues. 2 tables, 1 or 2 chairs, and a small
But
cabinet.
what about the security
Amongst the
cameras?
ashes of a fire, the victim was identified almost immediately. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly, and she was the tenant of 13 Years Court. The 2 of them were supposedly well acquainted, and Kelly had asked if he
Here's
could
a bit's
spare
coffee.
£50. But Hutchinson was broke, and Kelly was desperate for money, so they soon parted ways. Moments later, Hutchinson observed Kelly being accosted by a well-dressed man. The two of them had a seemingly jovial interaction and began talking more.
Chasing George.
Hutchinson remained in the vicinity until 3 o'clock, but neither Kelly nor the man reappeared.
So he just sat there for an hour?
In stark contrast to the loud singing upon her last departure, Cox was now struck by the complete absence of sound and light. According to Dr. Bond, Kelly died between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Phillips placed the time of death a few hours later. But some witnesses were quite adamant that they had seen or even spoken to Kelly as late as 8 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Later was discovered at a quarter to 11. These contradictions are difficult to reconcile, and the precise time of death eludes us.
Well, how about the people that heard the cries of murder? Why? Can we ask them why they didn't do anything? And what about Hutchinson, who just sat there scoping it out?
This misguided manhunt is somewhat emblematic of the whole investigation. The police pursued even the most tenuous of leads due to lack of evidence.
They should have just hung out at prostitutes' places.
Interviewed thousands, investigated
Just
hundreds,
post up like an
and
officer at the
developed
main
numerous
prostitute
theories.
hotspots.
In the words of Inspector Frederick Abeline,
Theories. We were lost almost in theories.
this profile was prepared by Dr. Thomas Bond, and he described the Ripper as a strong, middle-aged man with an inoffensive appearance who dressed respectably. Bond's most controversial
Jesus, who was that
assessment
one?
was that
Peter
the killer
Pan?
possessed both he likely had some form of employment, as the murders were committed around weekends and public holidays, and he may have had some degree of anatomical knowledge.
I don't think he did.
With this unshakable profile in hand,
I think he's a
let's
fucking
take
idiot.
a closer look at it.
Of course, I still watch slapping.
On the
It's just
morning
there's
of
no new
August
ones
the
yet.
31st,
Like there's some
Charles
TV
Cross
beatdown.
left his home on Doveton Street, then headed for work. When he turned into Bucks Row, he happened upon the body of Valeria Jenkins. Moments later, he was joined by Robert Paul, and events transpired as previously described. Despite his proximity to the crime, Cross appears to have escaped suspicion from both the press and the police. He was evidently seen as the innocent passerby that he appeared to be, when he was interrupted by the approaching footsteps of Bond. Cross then concealed the murder weapon and portrayed himself as someone just found the body. The injuries inflicted upon Nichols would be consistent with an interruption, as they were less severe than those of later victims. What's interesting about Cross
That is a good point.
he likely testified under a false name. He claimed to be employed as a carman, and his address was given as 22 Doveton Street. But surviving records show that in 1888, this address was occupied by a man named Charles Letchman.
Maybe he
was
forgot
also
his last
employed
name.
As a carman.
Executives to begin, Steve.
The most compelling evidence against Lecturer is that his morning commute between home and work roughly coincides with the time and place of the murders.
It's definitely this fucking
Except
guy.
for the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. who
Yeah, but they're
were
not
killed
far.
on Sunday,
Just
the
one
only day
terminal
when Lecturer
remaining.
would have been free from work.
What
Not
do you
only
know?
that, but all the murders were committed around weekends and public holidays. Why would a man who supposedly timed the murders with his morning commute gravitate towards days of rest? While there is no evidence of Letchmere ever being suspected by the police, it is difficult to believe that he was completely overlooked. Many case files have not survived, so any doubts investigators might have had could have long since disappeared.
Executives
Now,
of
a
Jordan.
witness who definitely attracted attention was Joseph Barnett.
Yeah, but it was Charles Cross. I believe it was Charles Cross. In fact, I know it was. After hearing that, nothing else could convince me otherwise. Until Lamino makes a great case for Joseph Barnett.
Was the man. Barnett was employed as a fish porter, but for reasons unknown, he lost his job between July and August of 1888. From that point onwards, the couple struggled to pay rent, and Kelly resorted back to prostitution. Now, those who believe that Barnett was the Ripper view his loss of employment as a turning point. The argument is that Barnett was so overcome with guilt and anguish for driving Kelly back to prostitution that he directed murder.
Isn't 5 Yusuf done?
visit on the evening of November the 8th, but they had parted on quote friendly terms. He then supposedly went home, played a card game until 12:30 before going.
Did he play Yu-Gi-Oh?
According to Burnett, the key to room 13 had been missing for some time. Because of this, he and Kelly would quote open the door by reaching through the broken window. The door was said to be closed with a quote catch lock, and that the lock itself upon being closed. Mystery solved. But even if the door was not self-locking, there's still an obvious solution. All the killer would have had to do was observe Kelly using the window trick and then employ that same technique to fasten the door upon leaving. But those who favor Barnett as the Ripper offer yet another solution.
I want you to
The key
take a
never
good
went
look at
missing.
your map.
Instead,
There's
Barnett
to
is
it.
said to have stolen the key and then used it on the night of the murder. These solutions are all equally valid, and it's impossible to know which one is correct.
Yeah, but it's with Charles Cross.
There is a
He
slight
was the
variation of this
Ripper.
theory. While it's only natural for suspicion to fall upon witnesses and acquaintances, Victorian detectives did pursue other lines of inquiry. One prominent theory was that the Ripper suffered from insanity, and the prime suspect in that category is Aaron Kosminski.
Ooh. I haven't heard that name yet. Have we? I don't remember
One
Kosminski.
simple murders investigation, surviving records show that an Aaron Kosminski was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1891. Aaron was indeed from Poland, he was Jewish, and had lived in he suffered from multiple long-term symptoms of paranoid fear of being fed by others. Only on rare occasions would he get, quote, excited and violent. However, before his confinement, Aaron had once threatened his sister with a knife. The case against him largely hinges on claims made by Anderson and Parents Knox. It's actually the claim of an unnamed witness identified as suspect.
There had to be a witness at some point here. These murders were committed in front of fucking apartments.
But in recent years, Aaron Kosminski has been
Good luck.
resurrected as
That
a prime
thing is one of
suspect
Gannon's
due to a
own. It plays
controversial
dirty.
DNA analysis.
Defeated me
Oh.
100 years
So
ago,
Back in 1888,
but only because I was
Acting
winging it.
Sergeant Amos Simpson
They found his old
is
cum sock?
stolen a blood-stained
You
shawl.
must avenge me, Link.
This shawl was then passed down from one generation
His
to the
aim is
next
dead on. Watch
before
yourself.
being submitted for DNA testing in 2011. DNA samples were extracted from the shawl and then compared against maternal descendants of Edos and Kosminski.
What?
If the subsequent news coverage is to be believed, the mystery has now been quote definitively solved. Aaron Kosminski was Jack. But as you can imagine, it's never quite easy.
That's fucking wild.
Providence, but in recent years, Aaron Kosminski has been resurrected as a prime suspect due to a controversial DNA analysis. Okay, so
Oh.
back in 1888, Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson
They found his old
said
cum
he'd
sock?
stolen a blood-stained shawl from the crime scene of the shawl was then passed down from one generation to the next
Why?
before being submitted for DNA testing in 2011. DNA samples were compared against maternal descendants of Edos and
What?
in both cases. If the subsequent news coverage is to be believed, the mystery is now been quote definitively solved. Aaron Kosminski. It's never quite easy.
That's fucking
First of all,
wild.
The provenance, or so to recap, a suspect named Kosminski was identified.
Wow.
This was enough to convince at least one senior officer of his guilt. That suspect may have been Aaron Kosminski. He was largely non-violent, but was threatening his sister with an knife. Aaron can either be incriminated or eliminated by the DNA. He spent the rest of his life in psychiatric care and died in 1989.
I still think it's Charles Cross. I really do. All that made so much sense for Cross.
Named Francis Tumbleton was arrested in London. He promised to cure anything from dyspepsia and scurvy to cancer and blindness.
Man, some things never change. There's still people just like this.
He was either accused or convicted for crimes like assault, attempted execution, or absolute revocation. He was even implicated in the assassination of
Watch your
US
blind
President
spot.
Abraham Lincoln, but was ultimately cleared of suspicion. Now, upon his death in 1960, but amongst many valuable possessions, healthcare fleets
Oh shit. That's pretty interesting. God damn it! I still think it's Charles Cross. I better see James Corden on here as a suspect.
But these grand conspiracies and elaborate systems against the sheer simplicity of a suspect like Charles Lecter, an unassuming delivery man.
I really think it's Charles Cross, yeah.
With a suspect pool in the hundreds, that might seem improbable, but London is the largest city in the world, home to the largest port. It is a city of millions, with a large population. It's not difficult to find one lowly sailor, butcher, medic, soldier,
God, that was good. But we all know it was Charles Lechmere. I think we can all know. The intellectuals will know. Charles Cross, Charles Lechmere are the same person. Charles Cross is the name he went by to testify, instead of his real name, which is Charles Lechmere. Oh yeah, flight. I still remember this, man. This shit was so fucking scary. I haven't seen the video. I remember the event. Did they solve it? No. I mean, I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure it's still unsolved. They just have a working theory. Yeah, no, it's still not solved. It's just working theories. Gonna see some punk chick in the 5 gift sub sweat. Thank you, man. Appreciate it, man. Sweat. Thank you a long time of watching, handyman.
Standby.
At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, a Boeing 777 is preparing for departure.
Agent 370, request level.
770, we are ready, requesting for the 310 to Beijing.
The unidentified airplane, I forgot.
370 is a daily passenger flight between Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia and Beijing, China.
370, 32 right of takeoff. Nice. 370, Captain Malaysia 37, thank you, right.
42 minutes
some
past
cold-
midnight, Flight 370 is given clearance to depart.
The
On
bits beef.
board are Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 10 cabin crew members, and 227
Well,
passengers.
I'll be plucked.
Was this plane ever found? I don't know. I don't know.
Malaysian 370, Lampu,
What
radar,
for?
morning, climb flight level 250.
Morning, level
Bits,
250,
the boy.
Malaysian 370.
Malaysian 370, climb flight level 350.
Well done.
350,
I suppose I should thank you now that my spirit is
Less
free.
than an hour into
This
deployment,
returns
the
Meadow
plane is
back to
cruising
its
over the
rightful
South China
owner.
Sea at an altitude of 35,000 feet.
Don't
The
preen
night sky
yourself
is
just for
clear,
doing your
and
job.
the weather
They found
I do
pieces, but not the
suppose you've
whole
Flight
proven
thing.
your
370
value as a
instructed to
warrior.
signal air traffic
A
control
warrior
with
worthy
Ho Chi
of
Minh
my
now,
unique
as
ability.
it is about
The
to
sacred
enter
skill that I have dubbed Rivali's
The flight
Gale.
controller in Kuala Lumpur says tonight, no sign of anything.
Maintaining level 350. Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370.
It's now time to move on and start making preparations for Meadow Strike on Ganon. But only if you think you'll still need my
Use
help
use of
while
acid
you're fighting
redemption.
inside Hyrule Castle.
Yeah, I know
1
Jeremy
minute
do it.
Feel
and
free to
43
thank me now.
seconds later, the aircraft suddenly vanished from radar screens at Kuala Lumpur, Ho Chi
Or,
Minh.
never mind, just go.
This form of positional tracking depends on a signal
Your job
quickly.
is far
by
from
one of two
finished, you know.
transponders aboard a plane, and so its disappearance would suggest both transponders ceased to function, or the system was manually deactivated.
The princess.
All subsequent attempts to contact and ascertain the whereabouts of Flight 370 are unsuccessful. The aircraft has seemingly vanished without a trace. After missing its scheduled time of arrival in Beijing some 4 hours later, Flight
Thanks,
370
Snarly.
is officially declared missing. And in the wake of that announcement, the most expensive search effort in aviation history is about to commence.
And then I remember like a year after this, Malaysian Airlines also had another plane go missing or another accident. I don't recall. But that one was really fucking eerie because one of the passengers had tweeted, "Here's my flight if it goes missing," and then it actually fucking did.
Of the flight's disappearance between the South China Sea and the Gulf of Thailand, the search area was expanded. Military disclosed unlike the radar system, long-range military sponsors but used for flight.
Just kind of worked for the company and then became friends. Yeah, you just have to balance it.
It maintained a this northwesterly heading until it escaped from the coast of March. Over the next few days, the Strait of Malacca aircraft and vessels, but there was no trace of Flight
Meadow
370.
sights are now set.
Meanwhile, investigators began to analyze the
You'll have a
aircraft's
precise
satellite
feed on Ganon
communication
from this
records.
vantage point.
Like all modern
When the time is
airliners,
right,
Flight 370
give
was
him
equipped with a
everything you've
satellite
got.
communications terminal, or SATCOM,
Now
to
we wait
send
for
and
that
receive
perfect
transmissions to and from the ground. Prior to
Meadow,
departure, the
we've
SATCOM
been
terminal
artfully
had logged on
patient
to the
for the
satellite
last
network
100
and
years.
established a
I
connection with
doubt
the ground
you'll suffer
station
a feather
in
over a
Perth,
few more
Australia.
moments.
That station then maintained a detailed record of all the incoming and outgoing traffic between it and Flight 370. This is what
After
it
all
contained.
these years, I
Prior
simply
to the
must
flight's
admit the
disappearance
truth.
over the South China Sea,
Even without
everything
the power
appeared to
of
be
flight,
working as intended.
Link made his way to
Then,
this
at
divine
some
beast
point during
and
this
accomplished
portion of the
something
flight,
that even I
the
could
SATCOM
not.
link was severed.
Guess
What
I was
happened? Did they
wrong
see like a
about
fucking
terminal.
dragon in the sky and just like get the fuck away from it?
3 minutes after
Jesus
the flight
Christ.
crashed
Hope that luck holds out,
randomly,
Link.
the terminal
everyone's
requested to
sake.
log back onto the network. The SATCOM link was successfully re-established and was not disrupted again until nearly 6 hours later, when the flight is presumed to have crashed due to fuel exhaustion. During these final hours, 2 attempts were made to contact the plane via
Needs to give
satellite
some bill.
telephone. Both calls were acknowledged by the SATCOM terminal and would have been routed to the cockpit, yet they went unanswered. The terminal had also
He's
responded to
reaching
5 automatic status requests. In short, if the ground station had not heard from the aircraft in over an hour, it would transmit a signal to
What do you mean,
confirm the
Coldplay?
terminal was still online.
It's a real
While
story.
these transmissions did not contain any information about the flight's position, investigators were able to measure the distance between the satellite and the aircraft at the
Hijacking?
time of each transmission, based on how long it took those transmissions to be
Use of
sent and received. This generated 7 rings of possible locations from which 7 of these transmissions are thought to have originated. By taking fuel consumption, speed, and other factors into account, flight path analysis indicated the most probable origin of the final transmission to be somewhere along this arc in the southern Indian Ocean. The search effort shifted accordingly, and as the region fell within the jurisdiction of Australia, the Australian government took charge of the operation. Over the next few weeks, the search area was progressively
Why
refined
hijack
to
and not
account
make
for
any
oceanic
demands?
drift as well as improved
Good
estimations
point.
of the flight path. But this
Yeah, what
part
would they
of
hope
the
to
southern
accomplish
Indian
with
Ocean
hijacking it?
is so remote it took
Win the
6
plane?
days just to get there. A new fleet of aircraft and vessels gradually covered more than 4.5 million square kilometers of ocean, but Flight 370 was nowhere to be found. If the impact with the ocean had been sufficiently forceful, it was possible the resulting sound had been recorded by underwater listening devices known as hydrophones. This possibility was investigated, and 4 hydroacoustic monitoring stations had recorded something.
It is crazy how much shit there is, like, already in the world. Like, if it crashes in the middle of nowhere, luckily we still have these robo-lizards that we have just for monitoring. Might be picked up by one of those.
While the timing and direction of the sound were reasonably consistent with the final satellite transmission, the estimated origin was not. The sound was in all likelihood caused by nothing more than geological activity. Flight 370 was also equipped with 2 underwater locator beacons which had a battery
Tier 1
life
out
of
of
some
control.
40 days. And as the deadline approached in
Resub
early
dank.
April, signals with a pulse and frequency
danky.
somewhat similar to the signal emitted by the beacons were detected at depths of up to 3,000 meters. An autonomous submersible then spent weeks scanning the seafloor where the signals had been detected, but no wreckage was ever found. And nothing would be found until more than 16 months later, when a discovery was made on the opposite side of the Indian Ocean. On the 29th of July 2015, a group of people were cleaning up a beach in Reunion, a small island to the east of Madagascar, when they stumbled upon this 2-meter-long metallic object covered in barnacles. Aviation experts
what
quickly
barnacles look
identified
like?
the object as a section of an aircraft.
I guess I've never seen a
object.
barnacle. Looks like it's fucking growing almonds. They're like little sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds or something. Man, barnacles are fucking weird.
Covered in barnacles. Aviation experts quickly identified the object as a section of an aircraft wing
Thanks to
known as a
Resub Revel
flaperon.
and
Upon
Asen.
closer inspection, internal markings including dates and serial numbers conclusively ascertained the flaperon belonged to Flight 370. Even though Reunion Island is some 4,000 kilometers west of the search area, and more than a year had
Tier
gone
1
by since the
dimetric.
object disappeared, the location was consistent with simulations of debris dispersal patterns. It was now tangible evidence that Flight 370 had crashed somewhere in the Indian Ocean. The discovery of the flaperon prompted numerous searches along beaches and shorelines of southeastern Africa, and at least 31 additional items of interest have since been recovered and examined. Some of these items include a section of the outboard flap from the right wing, a piece of cowling from one of the 2 engines, a partial door from the nose landing gear, a section of the vertical stabilizer,
I fucking
and a
hate
mangled
airplanes,
casing
man.
from one of the embedded headrests.
This is why I don't fly. This shit is terrifying.
18 of these items were identified as either likely, highly likely, or almost certain to have originated from Flight 370, whereas only 3 could be confirmed. The remaining 11 could not be identified. There were no traces of an explosion found on any of the debris tested, nor was there any evidence of a fire except for 3 small burn marks on one of the unidentifiable items. The search for debris was further aided by Earth observation satellites. Analyses of satellite imagery from March of 2014 uncovered a number of images which appear to feature man-made objects floating on or just below the surface in the southern Indian Ocean. However, the images were not nearly sharp enough to resolve any identifiable markings, and multiple searches notwithstanding, this debris was never recovered. A satellite image taken mere hours after the final transmission also captured what appeared to be a contrail some distance away from the search area. A later analysis, however, concluded it was most likely a shadow from a somewhat linear cloud formation. The underwater portion of the search continued for months and eventually years before it was finally suspended in early 2017, by which point
they gave up.
120,000 square kilometers of seabed had been scrutinized. The search effort was then resumed by an American salvage company known as Ocean Infinity, but after more than a year of searching,
Well,
they
how would they
too
have done
came
that,
up
Ryan?
empty-handed. Unless the final resting place of Flight 370 can be located, it may be impossible to determine exactly why it crashed. Nevertheless, there have been no shortage of theories. On the day of the disappearance, 2 of the passengers raised suspicion as they had boarded the flight with stolen passports, which immediately prompted concerns of a hijacking. But investigators
just
were
doesn't
unable
make
to link the two
sense.
men to any terrorist organizations, and soon determined they had traveled under false identities because they were seeking asylum, not due to any nefarious intent.
Yeah, like hijacking wouldn't make any
Suspicions
sense.
were
They
raised
didn't
on
make
one
any
of the
demands.
passengers who identified as a flight engineer, who might have possessed the necessary expertise to take control of the Boeing 777. Apart from the 239 persons on board, Flight 370 carried nearly 11 metric tons of cargo. Among the items listed on the flight manifest was a shipment of lithium-ion batteries, which led some to suspect a fire might have broken out mid-flight. For instance, the crash of
Why do we
UPS
still use
Airlines
lithium
Flight 6 in
batteries?
September of 2010
Nothing good
was
comes from
the
that
result
shit.
of a fire that was ignited by a pallet of lithium-ion batteries. Another potential source of ignition would be an electrical malfunction. The crash of Swiss Air Flight 111 in September of 1998 is thought to have been caused by a fire
Your
within
phone?
the electrical wiring above
My
the
phone
cockpit.
doesn't use
The
lithium-ion
fire
batteries,
damaged and
ion
disabled
batteries.
multiple avionic
It's an iPhone.
systems, including the
It uses
transponders
children's
and
tears to
SATCOM.
power it.
In the case of Flight 370, the sudden loss of communication and subsequent deviation
Is
from
it
its
tier 1
scheduled
hello there?
flight path might have been a direct response to a fire. The two pilots may have turned back towards Malaysia to attempt an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport. But no such attempt was ever made. Instead, Flight 370 kept going and remained aloft for another 6 hours. Some have theorized the crew might have been incapacitated by a sudden or gradual loss of cabin pressure. For instance, when Helios Airways Flight 522 failed to pressurize in August of 2005, the pilots quickly fell unconscious. Yet the aircraft continued to fly on autopilot for more than 2 hours until it ran out of fuel. Airline pilots are of course trained for such an event.
Wait, what
In the
the
event of cabin
fuck?
depressurization, fell unconscious.
Wait, did it crash or did it land itself? What the fuck? We have the capability for the plane to just completely fly itself on the pattern? I thought you still needed the pilot present to guide it. I thought it was just kind of like activating cruise control in your car. Hold on a second. Did it crash or did it like just have a successful landing all autonomously? Oh, it crashed. Oh, fuck. So it didn't pressurize and everyone was incapacitated. Holy shit. Oh, did he say it crashed? Oh. I just looked at this. I didn't even notice it said crashed. Oh, that'll do it. Thanks to the resub, Erotic and J. Cuddy.
Yet the aircraft continued to fly on autopilot for more than 2 hours until it ran out of fuel. Airline pilots are of course trained for such an event. In the event of cabin depressurization, an automatic system is designed to deploy oxygen masks to give the pilots enough time to perform an emergency descent
Thanks for the
to a
3
more
chaotic.
breathable altitude. The data recorded by the Malaysian military radar does indeed contain altitude
Maybe it's
information,
scary.
but it is highly inconsistent. In fact, the Boeing 777 is incapable of performing the extreme altitude fluctuations recorded. At one point, the aircraft exceeded its maximum operating altitude by more than 15,000 feet before making a 50,000 feet nosedive in less than a minute. Attempts to recreate these maneuvers on a flight simulator were unsuccessful, and thus the data was deemed inaccurate and unreliable. If
But
Flight
what if?
370 did lose cabin pressure at 35,000 feet, and the pilots were incapacitated before descending to a more oxygenated altitude, it might explain why the aircraft remained aloft for as long as it did. What is a bit more difficult to explain, however, are these alterations in heading. Flight simulations have established the aircraft must have been under manual control during the initial left turn, as the bank angle or inclination of the turn was beyond the limits of the autopilot. Subsequent turns, however, could have been either manual or automatic. But for the autopilot to have made these course corrections, someone with the requisite knowledge must have programmed it to do so.
What
The
the
only
fuck?
other alternative is that the aircraft was in fact under manual control.
Thanks to the bits beef and hello there. Yeah, I was talking about it the other day, hello there. I still haven't caught up on all of it, but yeah, it's a pretty fucked situation.
In late June of 2014, several news outlets reported that a special investigation had identified the captain of Flight 370 as a prime suspect. A search of the captain's home uncovered a flight simulator which supposedly contained a suspicious route which ended in the southern Indian Ocean. At the time, there was no official acknowledgement that such a route had been recovered, and a lengthy public report issued by the Malaysian government in 2015 made no mention of such a discovery. Then, in 2016, confidential documents pertaining to a forensic examination conducted by the Royal Malaysia Police in May of 2014 was leaked to the media. These documents made it clear that such a route had not only been recovered, but thoroughly examined. Soon thereafter, the Malaysian government confirmed the existence of this simulated flight path, and this is what it looks like. It should come as no surprise that many evidence of premeditation, but according to investigators, it's not quite so evident. The data recovered consists of 7 coordinates, 2 in Kuala Lumpur, 2 in the Strait of Malacca.
What was he planning to do? Drive it straight to fucking Antarctica?
The data was reconstructed from a file that had been automatically generated and saved by the simulation software a month before the incident. However, it's not clear whether the coordinates were actually the same flight.
Oh,
In other
murder,
words, it might
suicide,
not be
I guess,
correct to simply
maybe.
trace a continuous line between these 7 coordinates, as they could be from separate sessions. The forensic examination by the Royal Malaysia Police simply concluded no activity captured conclusively indicates any kind of premeditated act pertaining to the incident of MH370.
He's a bit sweeper.
Even
the
so, the
resub rat king.
similarities between the simulated route and the presumed route of
Because of
Flight
shit like this,
370
eBay, I don't know,
directly
it's scary.
influenced the search operation. Australian investigators consider the possibility of someone deliberately extending the range of the flight by gliding the aircraft off the fuel exhaustion. If so, the plane could have traveled an additional 200 kilometers. Alternatively, the range could have been reduced by a controlled ditching prior to fuel exhaustion. While ultimately deemed unlikely, these 2 scenarios did affect the search effort. If the captain steered Flight 370 off course with the intention of crashing in a remote part of the southern Indian Ocean, his motive is an even greater mystery. Sahari Ahmad Shah was 53 and married with 3 children. He had more than 18,000 hours of flight experience and a spotless track record. Investigators found no evidence of financial issues, and his monthly expenses before the disappearance indicated nothing unusual. He had no history of mental illness, nor had he displayed any
He's a tier
recent
1
changes in
FFCC.
lifestyle or behavior. He was raised on the island of Penang, which has led some to speculate the flight's second turn to the southwest of Penang was the captain getting a final view of his hometown. Some believe a hijacking could have been politically motivated, as Sahari was an avid supporter of a democratic opposition leader who was sentenced to 5 years in prison mere hours before Flight 370 took off. Others point to unconfirmed reports of marital issues, but this is contradicted by the official investigation and disputed by family members. The only real inconsistency
cool.
noted by the
Can look that
final
up.
report is that the
Harrison?
captain failed to repeat the assigned radio frequency during the last verbal communication.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
It would have been standard procedure to repeat the assigned frequency, as the captain had correctly done a few minutes prior.
370, contact Lampu Radar 13269. Alright, 13269 Malaysian 370.
Whether this omission is
This is a tier 1
indicative of
hubster.
anything but a mistake is anyone's best guess.
Yeah, I don't think that means
By
shit.
all accounts, Captain Sahari was an affable and well-respected pilot who was passionate about aviation, as evident by the photos and videos he shared on social media.
Hi everyone, this is a YouTube video that I made.
Oh, that's kind of cute.
The co-pilot was found to be even less conspicuous. Farik Abdul Hamid was only 27 and due to marry a fellow pilot. He had nearly 3,000 hours of flight experience, although only 39 hours in this type of aircraft. Much like Sahari, Farik had no financial, mental or interpersonal issues of note, nor was there any evidence of conflict between the 2 of them. Some questioned the plausibility of a pilot-instigated hijacking due to the apparent lack of interference by the other pilot. Well, when Ethiopian Airlines Flight 702 was hijacked by the co-pilot in February of 2014, he did so by merely waiting for the captain to take a bathroom break before locking the cockpit door behind him. The co-pilot was then free to divert the Italy-bound flight to Switzerland to seek asylum. The only
I don't remember that
noteworthy
at
piece
all.
of evidence in regards to the co-pilot of Flight
This is Prime
370
Doggo.
is
Two
this
gift subs.
phone.
Two gift
You
subs
see, when the
diametric.
confidential documents were leaked, they also confirmed another long-circulated
That sounds
rumor,
cool, conveyor.
namely that the cell phone tower had briefly established a connection with an iPhone 5S belonging to the co-pilot as Flight 370 approached the island of Penang. According to investigators, it was not a phone call as has been widely reported by the media, but merely an automatic location signal. Why this information was omitted from public reports, we may never know. So what is one to make of all of this? On the one hand, the simulated flight path seems suspicious. On the other, it is difficult to cast any substantial doubt on either of the two pilots' characters.
Yeah, I mean, the dude
It is
seems
equally
nice. Like, I
difficult
don't think
to
it's
deny a hijacking is
on purpose.
consistent with the available evidence. Then again, we're missing some quite major and literal pieces of evidence. The final report issued by the Malaysian government in 2018 could not attribute the loss of communication nor the diversion of Flight 370 to malfunction. Instead,
Thanks
it
to
is
Tier 1
believed that someone
Afghan.
manually manipulated the aircraft and its systems. For instance, investigators believe SATCOM was manually disabled by a sudden and prolonged interruption of power. Then, once power was restored, the terminal simply rebooted. Likewise, the alterations in heading are believed to be the result of manual inputs. With that being said, the uncertainty of these findings are repeatedly emphasized due to the limited evidence available, and the report does never explicitly state the flight was hijacked. In fact, no real conclusion is reached. Both the Malaysian and Australian government agree that Flight 370 crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, but that the cause is indeterminable without the wreckage, the location of which has managed to elude some of the foremost aviation experts in the world, as well as an impressive arsenal of cutting-edge technology for more than half a decade. Authors, aviation experts, and independent investigators have all chimed in
guess
to
beef,
offer their
perhaps.
own thoughts and theories as to the nature of the crash and the location of the wreckage. Some believe there was no crash, but that the aircraft was shot down by an American naval base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The satellite transmissions were then supposed to be
That wouldn't
forced
make any sense,
over
though.
a massive cover.
Wouldn't explain
Others
this.
say the aircraft turned right towards India and traveled as far north as Kazakhstan, completely undetected. Debris was then supposedly planted along shorelines of southeastern Africa as
Okay.
part of a massive cover.
That makes sense, I guess.
The theory suggests the aircraft was remotely hijacked and controlled by someone on the ground.
Thanks to Prime
While
Greg.
Boeing and other companies have experimented with technology that would allow for an aircraft to be remotely controlled, no commercial airliner is known to be outfitted with such a system. On the less conspiratorial side, the assumption that Flight 370 flew in a straight line and at a constant speed after turning left towards the southern Indian Ocean might simply be incorrect. In early 2018, a French team of independent
Thanks for 5 gift
investigators
subs, BG,
proposed
please.
an
Thank you,
alternate
BG.
flight path, whereby an attempted landing on Christmas Island led to a crash site much further north than the region identified by the
Christmas
official
Island,
investigation.
huh?
While a surface search
Wow.
of this area was conducted about a week after the disappearance,
What are the odds?
the underwater phase never reached this far north.
Thanks to the resub, Jimmy.
As of the making of this video, the search operation
I have no
has
idea
been
when
suspended, but there have been talks of potentially resuming the search. For now, it seems, the vanishing of Flight 370 will remain a mystery.
I had no idea it was that deep. From what I remember, I thought it was just pretty well understood that it crashed. And I thought it was just like a straight line and then something happened, they didn't know what. I had no idea there was this whole like turn, all this shit. I had no clue. That is so fucking weird. So the first turn had to be manual. They had to manually turn off the systems like shit. Why do people keep saying shot down? That wouldn't make any sense. That doesn't explain this at all. And also why the systems would be turned off. It was shot down by 5G towers. Yeah, maybe that makes more sense. Thanks for the gift sub, Skittle, and the resub, Jimmy. What an interesting fucking mystery, man. Yeah, I fucking hate planes. If even one plane malfunctions and crashes, I'm never going on one. It's fucking horrifying. I wish we could just have some sci-fi shit, or it's just a giant portal that rips through space-time continuum, so that way you don't have to be, like, reatomized. You just, like in Jumper, you know? Or not Jumper. Doctor Strange. You just open this giant thing and you see the other side and you just step right through. Simple and easy. Thanks to the resub, Ian. That'd be wonderful. Yeah, like a wormhole. That'd be so convenient. Thanks to the resub, Big Wedge. What if it closed while you were partway through? That's why you jump through. What are the odds that it'd close if you're like fucking jumping through? Seems unlikely. What are the odds of a plane crashing? I don't know. Not very high. Thanks to the tier 1 noob in the prime Loki. Net. Ah, fuck it. XQC watched it, I'll watch it. I actually really like the DB Cooper story. And I haven't seen this one yet. Thanks to resub Rick in the prime Gregory and Mustard.
A daring parachute escape from a flying
Mustard.
727 somewhere between wings.
A search was made of the plane immediately. We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went. I expect that we'll keep looking
Thanks, resub
until
Arsenal.
we find him or find out what happened.
I love the idea that a YouTuber, like, actually solves one of these things. I'm assuming he doesn't, right? But maybe he does, I don't know.
In the afternoon of November the 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington.
Different place, Hyper.
The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, and along with 36 other passengers and a crew of 6, he soon boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305. Once aboard, Cooper made himself comfortable in the middle of the last row of seats on the right side of the cabin. He ordered a drink and had a smoke, because this was the 70s. Once the flight was cleared for departure, Cooper turned around and handed an envelope to Flight Attendant Florence Schaffner. Inside the envelope was a note featuring a handwritten message stating he had a bomb. Schaffner reluctantly sat down beside him and glimpsed what appeared to be
Christ,
8
this story's
sticks
so
of dynamite
fucking wild.
inside his briefcase. Cooper's demands were quite simple. He wanted $200,000
Thanks to
in
resub,
cash
Joe.
and 4 parachutes.
Thank
He
you,
also
Bear.
demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle. Should they fail to comply with his demands, he threatened to, quote, do the job. Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew, while another
This was in
flight
like the
attendant by name of
60s, so
Tina Mucklow
200K
remained
back
by
then was
Cooper's
nuts.
side. By using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, Mucklow acted as an intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew.
They're
for the
70s,
remainder
whatever.
of the
Still a
hijack.
ton.
For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 maintained a holding pattern near Seattle, while local and federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom as well as the 4 parachutes. 10,000 $20 bills were collected from a local bank, while the
Thanks,
owner of
Risa,
a nearby
Meme Daddy.
skydiving school supplied the chutes. At
Yeah, I've seen it,
5:45
parts
p.m.,
good.
more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this point, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was brought to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, both the ransom and the parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In exchange,
How many people
Cooper
were on
permitted
board the
2 of
plane?
flight attendants, as well as all the passengers, to disembark, many of whom had not yet realized the flight had been hijacked.
36,
With the
60?
ransom paid and only 4
36.
crew members remaining on board, Cooper told Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees and below 10,000 feet. The lights in the cabin were to be switched off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underbelly of the fuselage, was to remain extended. 2 of Cooper's
Thanks,
demands
Resub
could
Nobly.
not be satisfied. First of all, the flight configuration he'd requested would not allow for a non-stop flight to Mexico City. As such, Cooper proposed a refueling stop in Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento before they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it was not possible.
It seems
to
like they're
depart with
on
the ventral
Cooper's side.
staircase
Like, yeah, you can
extended.
take the money and
Cooper agreed
tell us
to
where to go.
retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow remained by his side and taught him how to extend them once the plane was airborne. Parked for nearly 2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to head for the cockpit and that from this point onwards, he was not to be disturbed. The last time she
The
saw
bomb
Cooper,
turned out to be
he was
fake, though.
standing
Oh,
in the
sorry,
middle
don't mean
of
to
the
spoil
aisle
things.
as if though he was preparing to jump. Mucklow joined the rest of the crew, locked the cockpit door behind her, and some 3 hours later, Flight 305 safely landed in Reno. Once the flight
Sorry.
came to a stop, the crew
I could be
carefully
wrong, I
ventured
don't
into the
really
rear of
remember
the
that.
cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper nor the bomb. The aft stairway had been extended mid-flight and was slightly damaged upon landing. It seemed there was only one explanation for the hijacker's absence. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute, walked down the stairs, and leaped into the dark night.
Thanks, Resub beat on. I'm not sure, Bear.
As soon as it became clear that Cooper was no longer on board, dozens of FBI agents converged upon the aircraft, only to discover a disappointing amount of physical evidence. A black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes were all that Cooper left behind. Evidently he brought the ransom and briefcase along with him. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a
Thank you,
white
Tier 1.
male. He appeared
Resub
in his
Robin from the
mid-40s
Prime
and wore a dark trench coat, a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and dark shoes. Soon after boarding, he'd also donned a pair of sunglasses. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first of several composite sketches. Before they could mount a search, however, the FBI had to figure out when Cooper abandoned the ship. But that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members witnessed Cooper jumping from the plane, nor did the pilots of 2 fighter jets which escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno, which is not all too surprising given it was the middle of the night. Although the flight crew did report something odd, the last communication with the hijacker occurred at approximately 8:05 p.m. when the crew used the intercom to distance which Cooper replied. Within the next 10 minutes, the crew experienced what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, the crew suspected it might have been produced by Cooper's jump, and the subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion. Okay, so that's a careful when, but what about the where? While Cooper was very explicit about the flight's configuration and destination, he never specified any kind of route. In fact, Cooper was so impatient with the slow refueling in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to find a flight plan and simply told him to, quote, get the show on the road. As such, the captain
Basically, Resub Malkin.
without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a guide, authorities estimated the most probable flight at the approximately time of the jump was about 40 kilometers north of Portland. And so, after break of dawn, the FBI mounted an impressive search operation using helicopters, airplanes, and helicopters. The problem was, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, Cooper's eventual landing or drop zone was far more difficult to pinpoint. The loosely
Fuck,
defined
it's so
zone
cool.
covered
This guy's like an
vast stretch of
actual
mountainous
Galaxy Brain
wilderness
anime villain.
by a dense forest, so it was truly like hunting a real. Apart from the difficult terrain, the search was further complicated by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. Despite their efforts, authorities never managed to find a single trace of Cooper, nor the items that were with him.
progress by early December, the FBI turned their attention to the $200,000 ransom. The money had been collected from the Seattle First National Bank, which maintained a ransom package.
Very well-known bank, of course.
Just for some competition. Because of this, the serial number of the $10,020 banknotes given to Cooper had been drawn in advance. A complete list of which were circulated among financial institutions, agencies, and the general public. The intention was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even began to offer rewards to anyone who could find a note with a matching serial number. In spite of these efforts, no one ever did. That is until nearly a decade later. In early 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on a small beach in southern Washington. As he was digging into the sand, Ingram discovered 3 bundles of cash totaling $5,880. Having heard about the infamous skyjacking, Ingram's parents brought the severely degraded bundles to the FBI. The notes were promptly inspected, and sure enough, the serial numbers matched those of the ransom.
Fuck big fine Brian. Imagine being like an 8-year-old, fucking drinking milk, shitting in your diapers, and finding that.
Than it answered. The most significant of which was how? How did the money end up so far away from the drop zone? Looking at this map, it might be tempting to think that Cooper simply dropped some of the money, which then fell into the Lewis River. The bundles could then have been carried further downstream by the Columbia
Thanks to
River
Resub Crohn's and the
before
gift sub
finally being
PG.
washed ashore at Tina Bar, which is the name of the beach. Tina Mucklow, Tina Bar. Coincidence? Yeah, coincidence. Anyway, the problem with this idea is that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. This has led some, including members of the FBI, to re-evaluate the initial drop zone assessment. For instance, if the drop zone was much further southeast, close to a river called the Washougal River, it is conceivable, albeit improbable, that the money floated all the way down to Tina Bar. Alternatively, the bundles may have simply landed on the beach if the flight path was further to the west. Even so, natural explanations struggle to explain how 3 independent, potentially free-falling and or free-floating bundles of cash ended up at the exact same place on the same beach. To complicate matters, sediment from the riverbed was excavated and dumped onto Tina Bar as part of a dredging operation in 1974. And according to one analysis, the money was discovered above this layer of sediment. If true, that would mean the money came to rest at Tina Bar sometime after 1974. But a re-examination of that analysis found that what was believed to be a layer of deposited sediment might actually have been a perfectly natural layer of clay. Not only that, but the sediment was clearly dumped some distance away from where the money was discovered. Furthermore, when Ingram discovered the bundles, the rubber bands which held them together were still intact. This is significant because experiments conducted in 2009 revealed that this brand of rubber bands could not withstand exposure to open air or water for more than a year. So, unless the bundles were somehow protected from the elements, they must have become buried at Tina Bar within a year of the hijacking.
This is so fucking complicated.
Seems to be that Cooper or someone else deliberately buried the money. Did Cooper survive and bury the money himself? Did someone else bury the money after stumbling upon Cooper's remains?
If you're in the chat, DB Cooper, just let me know, man. This is crazy. I want to hear more about it.
It's managed to elude investigators for decades. Suffice it to say,
I didn't know any of this part.
Within a mystery. Since Ingram's discovery in 1980, both Tina Bar and the grounds around the Washougal River have been subjected to numerous searches.
I have not seen that, nobly.
But to date, there's been no sign of Cooper, nor the rest of the money.
You know, if Cooper was as smart as we think he is, he would have done all of this while having a full beard, and then when he jumped, he would have shaved the beard off. Just to add another layer of good ideas to it.
Cooper did not survive his daring escape. It would not make for a very thrilling conclusion to this story, but that's the thing about stories. They're usually far more exciting than reality. While there is no hard evidence for nor against Cooper's survival, the assumption that he fell to his death is not without merit. When Cooper leaped into the darkness, Flight 305 was plowing through a frigid rainstorm at roughly 170 knots, 10,000 feet above southern Washington.
No!
The wind was so violent that it ripped out a placard from the aft stairwell.
Oh, Jesus
which was
Christ.
later
He just
recovered in
fucking got
1978,
blasted.
almost directly below the estimated flight path. To say that Cooper was not dressed for the occasion would be an understatement. The ground beneath him, meanwhile, was obscured by multiple layers of clouds, which likely means that Cooper jumped without knowing his precise location. Even if he could see the ground and had a specific drop zone in mind, the parachute he selected was non-steerable, meaning he would not have been able to steer his descent towards a specific landing spot, thus precluding any potential coordination with an accomplice
So many
stationed on
problems.
the ground.
He also
While
forgot to
Cooper
account for the
expressed
dragons
some
that hover
familiarity
over
with
Portland, Oregon.
parachutes, his actual competence level is up for debate.
And also, on
It's
that
widely
night, there was a
believed that
javelin
Cooper
tossing
demanded
competition.
2 pairs of parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, to make the authorities believe that he intended to take a hostage. That is precisely what happened, as the FBI contemplated, but eventually decided against sabotaging the chutes, as they did not want to risk the life of an innocent civilian. But in their haste to obtain them, they unintentionally provided Cooper with a non-functional dummy chute intended for training purposes. This mishap seems to have gone unnoticed by Cooper because that dummy chute was one of the 2 missing from the plane. Not only that, but Cooper chose the older and technically inferior parachute out of the 2 primary chutes provided.
Nice.
So in both cases, it seems like Cooper made the worst possible choice. But
Thanks,
there
Resub
are
AJ,
other ways
Absolver,
to
and the
interpret
gift
this
sub banana.
information. For instance, it's possible that
Thanks, Cooper,
used the
the
dummy
resub can.
chute not as a reserve, but as a means to secure the bag of money. In fact, that is precisely what Cooper tried to do with the functional reserve chute. First, he tried to place the money in the chute's canopy before removing some of the suspension lines and wrap them around the bag. Perhaps he used the dummy chute for a similar purpose. And Cooper's decision to use the older primary chute is not necessarily an indication of experience. It could also be a sign of familiarity, because the chute he left behind was a civilian luxury chute, while the one he used was a military chute. The argument is that Cooper must have trained as, say, a paratrooper, and chose the older military chute because that's the one with which he was most familiar.
I'm starting to doubt it. I don't think so.
That Cooper had a military
You could have
background.
given him a giant pair of pants and he probably would have jumped off holding them.
Cooper mentioned that the
I think he's
McCord
dumb as
Air
fuck
Force
now.
Base was only 20 minutes away from the Seattle-Tacoma airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment and might suggest a military background. Apart from the potential military connections, Cooper may even have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency.
I doubt
You
it.
see, the type of aircraft which
He was
Cooper
probably
chose
like a
to hijack,
Redditor before
a
Reddit
Boeing
existed.
727, was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents and supplies during the Vietnam War. A task for which the Boeing 727 was uniquely qualified due to its distinctive aft stairway. So it's fairly safe to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it provided a relatively safe means of escape. Whether he learned of this from the CIA or came to that conclusion
Thanks, DBC.
independently is another
Sub
question.
Sugar Daddy.
However, the fact that Cooper chose to hijack a flight operated by Northwest Airlines was apparently random chance. When Tina Mucklow asked Cooper about his motives, he responded, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge."
Oh, that's
He
kind of
further
fucking
clarified
cool.
That Flight 305
Woo.
just happened to be in the right place at the
You're
right
not trapped
time.
in here with me.
Even so,
I'm trapped
it's
in here with
clear that
frigid
Cooper
weather
came
temperatures and a
prepared.
bad plan.
He seemed to know a great deal about aircraft and aviation. He appeared to be familiar with the local terrain. He maintained a low profile to avoid a panic. He covered his eyes with a pair of glasses to conceal his identity. He left very little evidence behind, and he demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption that he was taking hostage. He was even cunning enough to reclaim the note which he'd initially given to Florence Schaffner. Apart from the name he wrote on his plane ticket, there are no other samples of Cooper's handwriting. But for all his planning and cunning, it seems Cooper did not give enough thought to his eventual escape. Not
Yeah, the
only
most
did he
important
decide
part.
a route, but he was forced to
I
make
did
a
it.
last-minute destination
Now I'll just
change
kill
from
myself
Mexico
out here, I
City to
guess.
Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or jumpsuit. He could even have specified the ransom to be delivered in larger denominations to make it lighter and less cumbersome to carry.
Thanks to Tier 1,
Assuming
Joe.
he did survive the fall and made it safely to the ground, he may then have had to make his way through a dense, partially snow-covered forest in nothing but loafers and a trench coat in late November. I get the distinct impression that Cooper's escape was much more of a leap of faith than a carefully executed jump. On the other hand, authorities never received a
I love
missing
the
persons
animation he
report
has here with it too. He looks like he's really fucking struggling falling out.
This might suggest that Cooper did survive, and that he swiftly acquired assumed his normal routine. Furthermore, other hijackers have performed similar stunts, and many of them did survive, even if they were quickly apprehended. Finally, the simplest explanation for how 3 bundles of cash ended up at Tina Bar is human intervention. At the end of the day, most of this is based on nothing but supposition. Without any concrete evidence of Cooper's demise, it leaves the door wide open to the far more exciting proposition that he did, in fact, survive.
I've now been convinced that he's a fucking idiot. There's no chance. This man dove off in the middle of the night in the worst possible conditions. He should have. It's like he jumped into a volcano.
Among them was
He would have had a
man
higher
with
chance of surviving that.
initials DB and surname Cooper. This Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused for DB Cooper, and the rest is history. While Dan Cooper is most likely a pseudonym, there is a comic book series of the same name. The comic is written in French and centers around a Canadian pilot named Dan Cooper. While the comic was not translated into English nor sold in the United States before 1971, it was available in Canada, which has a large French-speaking population. Given that American and Canadian accents can be difficult to
Tier 1
distinguish,
MD wall.
it's possible that Cooper, who was described as having no discernible accent, was a bilingual Canadian. This might even be supported by something that Cooper might have said. You see, when the captain relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, he used the phrase negotiable American currency. It seems doubtful that an American citizen would specify American currency, so perhaps Cooper was not American. The problem is, we don't know if this is a direct quote from Cooper or paraphrasing by the captain. For instance, notes taken by the crew during the hijacking merely contain the phrase negotiable currency, while testimonies provided by the crew after the hijacking include phrases like $200,000 in cash and US currency. So, Cooper might have been Canadian.
I think Cooper might have been an alien. At this point, he could be anything, anyone. We could all be DB Cooper.
Taken his name from something or someone else. Nearly half a century has gone by since the hijacking took place, and in that time, thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It would obviously be impossible to cover all of them here, but let's take a look at some of the people that at some point or another have been suspected of being Cooper.
It's just a picture of my dad. This man loves working on old cars.
First became a suspect.
He's never parachuted, but we thought it was worth checking out anyway.
He seems like a solid candidate. He was a decorated Army paratrooper and helicopter pilot. He had experience with explosives. He had an extensive criminal record. He had an uncle named John Cooper who was an avid skydiver.
Whoa.
He was expelled from the army only months before the hijacking, which might suggest a motive. After all, the hijacker did say he had a grudge. When confronted by journalists and private investigators, Rackstraw would neither confirm nor outright deny that he was DB Cooper.
It's him then.
He'd say things like, I could have been, or I would not discount myself.
Thanks for the
On
gift
the
of
other
the
hand,
wall.
Rackstraw had light-colored eyes, which
And thanks
did
Cooper
not.
again.
More significantly, Rackstraw was only 28 years of age at the time of the hijacking. This is well outside the range of ages reported by the crew and passengers, most of whom believed Cooper was in his mid-40s. Kenneth Christensen first became a suspect in 2003 when his brother noticed certain parallels between him and Cooper. Christensen had briefly served as a paratrooper in World War II, and since 1953 he'd worked for Northwest Airlines as both a mechanic and a flight attendant. He was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking. He was left-handed, which Cooper might have been. For instance, Cooper used his left hand to interact with his briefcase, and the clip on tie he left on board was fixed with a tight clasp applied from the left. Shortly before he died in 1994, Christensen had supposedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." After his passing, his family discovered over $200,000 in his bank accounts. To top it all off, Florence Schaffner stated that photographs of Christensen bore a strong resemblance to Cooper.
Why don't you check the serial numbers on that
Christensen
money?
did not match the physical description of Cooper. He was both shorter
and lighter. While Schaffner did see a strong resemblance, she remarked that Cooper had more hair, and that is supported by the composite sketches. And there was nothing suspicious about the large sums of money which he'd simply earned by selling land.
This is the
Richard
70s. It wasn't
McCoy
digital.
first
I'm sure he
became a
had it
suspect
physical.
In 1972, when he hijacked a Boeing 727 and escaped via the aft stairway, much like D.B. Cooper. Because of the significant overlap between the two hijackings, some believe they must have been committed by the same person. McCoy used a fake name, he used a fake hand grenade to threaten the crew, he used handwritten notes to issue his demands. Both McCoy and Cooper used the phrase "no funny stuff" as a warning to the crew. McCoy demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. McCoy also
What the
pulled out the
fuck?
back of the plane once they passed over a small town in the state of Utah. Apart from the
What the
similar
fuck?
modus operandi, McCoy had also served in the Vietnam War as a demolitions expert and a helicopter pilot. McCoy did actually survive the fall and managed to evade authorities for 2 full days before he was apprehended and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Before his death in 1974, McCoy refused to confirm or deny that he was D.B. Cooper. On the other hand, McCoy was an avid recreational skydiver and even came prepared with a skydiving helmet and jumpsuit. He gave very specific
Thanks to Tier 1
instructions about the
stubs.
flight
We
path.
give some
In addition to
so.
the fake hand grenade, McCoy also used an unloaded handgun to threaten the crew. He failed to retrieve one of the notes he'd given to a flight attendant. He was only 29 years of age at the time of the hijacking, and all 3 flight attendants were quite certain that McCoy was not Cooper. While there are meaningful parallels between these two
That's a
cases,
lot of
McCoy might
parallels.
simply have been a copycat who'd read about D.B. Cooper in the news.
That is a lot of fucking parallels, though. Holy shit.
Dwayne Weber first became a suspect in 1995 when, shortly before his death, he supposedly told his wife, "I've got a
Vivaldi's
secret to tell
Gale
you.
is now
I
ready."
am Dan Cooper." Following his deathbed confession, Weber's widow recalled a number of fascinating details.
Basically gives some
She claimed to have
DB
found a
Cooper
bag
himself.
tag resembling the one used in the hijacking. She claims Weber had sustained a knee injury after jumping out of a plane. Weber supposedly had a nightmare about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. And a year before the money was discovered at Tina Bar, Weber had allegedly paid a quick visit to the same location. In addition, Weber was a World War II veteran, he had an extensive criminal record, he matched the physical description, and he was 47 years old in 1971. On the other hand, Weber's fingerprints did not match any of the prints collected from Flight 305. Although, to be fair, there's no way to know if any of those prints actually belong to Cooper. Furthermore, Weber's DNA did not match a DNA sample collected from the tie clasp. But once again, there's no way to know if the DNA on the tie clasp actually came from the hijacker and not someone else. What's so frustrating is that the FBI likely had a much better source of DNA at one point. If you recall, 8 cigarette butts were collected from the scene, and there's
Oh, I
a good
forgot
chance
about
they
that.
were all suffused with Cooper's DNA. The problem is, that evidence was lost at some point, and has not turned up since.
How? What do you do? Shove him up his butthole before jumping off? How did...
William Smith first
How?
became a suspect in 2018. Smith served in the Navy.
I totally
during
forgot
World War
about
II
that.
and likely had
Well,
some
they probably did
experience
too.
with parachuting. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking. He had dark brown eyes. He matched the physical description. He shared a certain likeness with the composite sketches, especially this speculative sketch of an older D.B. Cooper. A student named
That's
Ivor
definitely a
Van
drawing
Cooper,
from his
who was
grandson or
killed in World
something.
War II, attended the same high school.
That is just that man.
Smith worked as a
Drawn by his
yardmaster
son.
for a railroad company for most of his life, but in 1970 the company filed for bankruptcy. As a consequence, Smith lost his pension, which might suggest a motive. He could, for instance, have developed a grudge towards the airline industry for their role in bringing about the downfall of the rail transportation industry. It's further speculated that Smith could have used his knowledge of railroad networks to hop on a train and escape undetected. On the other hand, Smith spent his entire life in the northeastern United States. Given that the hijacking occurred on the other
Thanks to
side
give
of
some
the
Camille
country
so.
and was committed by someone who at least appeared to be familiar
I
with
guess
the local
Paul.
terrain, Smith is not the most ideal candidate. However, the fact that Smith worked as a yardmaster is interesting. You see, the tie that Cooper left behind was recently examined using an electron microscope, which uncovered various metallic particles. Some of these particles, especially pure titanium, were quite rare in 1971. This might suggest that Cooper worked as a manager at some sort of chemical or metallurgical facility. Or possibly, a Raylord.
I think it's him! The old man!
If nothing else, I hope this limited selection of suspects illustrates just how difficult it is to be certain when you have so little evidence to work
Yeah,
with.
that was fucking fascinating.
These 5 individuals look nothing alike, yet any one of them could be D.B. Cooper. Was Cooper really in his mid-40s, or did he simply look old for his age? Did Cooper really serve in the military?
Yeah, what if they all did it? There was 5 Coopers that kept switching out.
In 2016, the FBI had to admit defeat and officially close down the case. Unless someone stumbles upon Cooper's remains or manages to track down the rest of the money, it seems there is little hope of resolution. Did Cooper survive? I have no idea.
No, he
But as
didn't.
long
No
as that
chance.
possibility cannot be dismissed, the legend of D.B. Cooper will no doubt persist.
Thanks to Prime David. In my professional opinion, I think there's no fucking chance after hearing all of the conditions he would have had to go through to survive, that he actually survived. I think what could have fucking happened is he jumped out of the plane and just got split in half and gored by just awful temperatures. He probably went through like a fucking swarm of locusts too with everything he was saying was going on at the time. I think there's no chance that man fucking tapped down on the ground. He fucking died mid-flight.